Okay, so we're going to widen a fender for a 56 F100. So stock, this is the stock configuration of one. This is an aftermarket fender. So they have kind of a taper to them. And they actually get thinner in the back. So when they're on the truck, they actually do kind of look weird because the running board comes down and then the fender is wider in the front and thinner in the back. So this fender here, passenger side one, has already been done. There's no specific measurement for how much wider it is. I measured it till it's 13 5/8 off of the bed side, and I made the wheel well opening flat, so then it kind of varies in size from 3 inches in the back to inch and a little bit up here in the top, and then kind of flows out from there to make it all flat. So this one's done, ready for some body work, and we're going to start on this one and show you the step-by-step process of what it takes to do it. So first things first, I go around this lip here and hammer and dolly it flat. So when it comes, it's kind of wrinkly and crappy. So I take a hammer and a dolly and I flatten it nice and flat, which I've already done. So now I'm going to take it and I'm going to weld it flat right onto the table here. So this part of the fender would be where the fender bolts to the bed side. The bed side is flat on these trucks, so I want that to remain flat. So I'm just going to take the MIG welder and I'm just going to weld, just tack weld it, every 4 to 6 inches just around the table so it doesn't move at all on me. There's not a lot of uses for a MIG welder out there, but this is one of them. Okay, so now this, depending on when you push it here, you can see that that part of the fender moves in and out quite a bit. So I'm going to measure across the bolt span of a bed to see what that is so that I can make sure I tack it in the correct spot. So the bolt span is 54 inches, so now I'm going to tack one side. Okay, so now the fender is solid to the table. I have this piece of metal here that I bent up just from some scrap. Clamp it there, and then tack weld that in place. So I just space it enough where I can get my hand in here to work around without being too tight. The purpose of the plate is to make the wheel well square. Okay, so I'm going to tack weld that in place, and then we'll be ready to start cutting. Widest point of this fender about 11 1/4, and we're going to take it to 13 5/8. That's how much the widest part. And then the narrowest part is about 10 1/8, and that'll also go to 13 5/8. That's how much we'll move this whole thing up. So before we start, need some reference marks vertically here. This is just so when you cut it apart you can put it back together fairly in the same spot. It's not going to line up perfectly, but we'll get it really close. a mark all the way around this fender at 1 inch. So now I'm going to get an air saw and cut that around. We have our two pieces. We got the top fender and then the lip section. So I bent up these pieces here that I'm going to screw into place, and then we'll drop down the main fender, and then that's when we can square up that and then get everything screwed in place and then start building the filler pieces for them. Okay, so this is going to 13 5/8. I found this dandy stool over here somewhere that measures close to that. Now this here comes the tricky part. So basically this is the time consuming part. You kind of just go around with the square and you want them to all be 13 5/8, so all four corners. So you kind of just start clamping it to the pieces that are upright. And then it's going to move, so you got to go around it 3 or 4 times before you ever really get it in the right spot. Reference marks comes in. It was very shifted off on both of these sides. So it's better to address those things now than it is later. Otherwise, what it is, if this line's shifted off like a quarter or half an inch, then when you look at the fender, it's going to drop on you. So you gotta, those don't have to be 100% accurate, but they got to be pretty close. Now we gotta start over. Okay, so now the wheel lip is 13 5/8 off of the bed side. So this fender will end up getting widened about 3 3/4 in the back, and about 2 inches in the front, with even the shorter distance about 1 inch right here. So this is narrower because when these are made, the top here sticks out lower than that. So when it's on the truck, it's kind of crooked looking. And when you look at all these trucks, they're all a little bit different. So on these ones, we wanted to straighten that out. That way, when you see it, it's it's straight down the side. It doesn't have like a weird taper in or a knob. And then 13 5/8 for this one, that's just kind of what we decided on. So we have about 4 trucks in the shop. They're all widened, and they're all somewhere in the 13 1/4 to 14 and a little bit. This particular truck doesn't have super wide tires on it, so it doesn't need like really wide. So we went with 13 5/8, which seemed to be like a happy medium of something that looks like it should have come from the factory, and not something that's like super wide, like Pro Street tub looking. So now we'll just go in here and I'll use probably 4 to 5 pieces of sheet metal. I'll start in the middle, start filling this in, and then work my way out from there. So I'll cut a strip here for these ones, weld that all up, and then start shaping different strips for the front. Just weld it all up. Sheet metal work and making panels and welding together, you want to try to make the gap of the panel as tight as possible. So I am TIG welding this fender, so I can do it with no gap at all, because the TIG welder basically melts the two materials together with a little bit of filler rod. If you were MIG welding it, you would want a gap there. So when MIG welding it, you're not going to be able to hammer and dolly it and work it as much afterwards. I would prefer to TIG weld it like I'm doing, so then you can have a much stronger piece and it's much more workable in the end. Now when TIG welding it, you'd want no gap at all or very little gap, because when you heat it and weld it, the heat will shrink up. So if there's a gap there, like even right here where there's a tiny little gap, when I weld that, the weld will shrink that little gap, and that's what makes things warp easier. So down here where this is basically like hammered in to a fit, when I weld this whole piece here, there's going to be very little movement to it because there's nowhere for it to move because the gap's so tight. I will start with tacks like this, and then I'll come in and tack in between them all. And then after that, I'll probably just start kind of filling them in and jumping around a little bit. There's probably a dozen ways to do this or more. There's some that work well for others and some that work well for me. And this is what just works well for me. So it's not to say that it's the right way or the only way, but it's the way that I found that works the best, that gets things done in the most amount of time, or the least amount of time, I guess, most time efficient ways for me to do it. I do know people that would just do this whole thing in one pass, and they say that works well for them. So I've never tried that. I don't know. It might work well for you. One day I will try it and see what happens, but not today. Hey Steve, you want to do a lesson on sheet metal?
Yeah.
Okay. So with sheet metal, or any metal in general, there's only a few things you can do with it. You can stretch it, and you can shrink it. So shrinking is either done with like a thumbnail shrinking die, or with like a shrinker stretcher that pushes the metal together, or done with heat and quenching afterwards. I guess you can bend it also, but bending is a combination of shrinking and stretching, so it kind of goes back to the only thing you can do is shrink or stretch metal. So metal is made up of a bunch of little molecules pulled together, and when you hit it with impact from a hammer on a table, or a power hammer, or an English wheel, that separates the molecules out, which stretches it. So when you just think of this as a bunch of little tiny pieces in there. Now when they get hit, they get flattened a little bit. And when they get flattened a little bit, the rest of them disperse and make a little crown, which in turn stretches the metal. So I can hit this piece of metal between the hammer and the table right here, and pretty much do the same thing that a power hammer would do. It's a lot more hard, and it's going to take a lot more time, but if you grid this out, and you hit it in all these spots, you'll get a nice even crown from it. Hitting it either on a piece of wood or a metal table, either one. The wood will absorbs from the impact a little bit more, and you get less results. So on the metal table, there's no absorbing any of the impact, so then it's just a straight stretching. So when you take metal like this, if you wanted it to crown one direction, if you hit it with an impact, it's going to do a compound curve, because that's how the little molecules disperse when you hit it. So if you wanted to do like a single curve, you kind of just got to bend it over something, or hold it in like a sheet metal brake, and you can bend it nice and easy, or that's even how you could use the brake to bend it like that. And if you wanted a compound curve, you can either hit it with a hammer on the table, you can hit it with a power hammer, a planishing hammer, an English wheel, all of that stuff. So basically an English wheel stretches along the wheel, not the direction most people think. So most people think it stretches the same direction as the wheel, kind of, but it actually goes the opposite way. So when you run it through, the crown, where it touches the lower die to the upper, that stretches the metal in like a linear motion, and then stretches it down to whatever the radius die is. So on this piece that I'm making right here, for this piece of the fender, I'm just going to make it, this has like a slight curve to it one way, and then over here it gets tighter. So for a lot of this, I'm just hitting it over the table, the edge of the table, the corner of the table. You can use the shapes of the hammers you got to kind of fill in, hit it at the edge. I'll probably use the planishing hammer a little bit. I use the power hammer a little bit, just because it's quick and easy to kind of get it to the shape you want it, and then you can fine tune it with some other equipment. So that's basically what I'm doing right here, is just making a one solid piece to wrap around this corner and to tie this whole piece back together in the back of the fender. So some of these, depending on if you're going to run like a roll pan on your truck, you might want to square this off and bring this down, and then just kind of make it square. This particular truck's not getting a roll pan or anything, so I'm just going to put it back to pretty much what it would have looked like stock, being the stock with fender. Alright, so we got the fender all welded up now with the piece added in here. So you can see how much wider it's going to be in the back compared to the width in the front. You can kind of see it's got like a weird taper to it as it goes along. So I'm going to cut off of this piece here that holds this flat, do a little bit more hammer and dolly work around it, and then I'll cut it from the table and finish hammer dolly and grinding all these welds, and we'll get it ready to go to the body shop. Our finished widened F100 rear fender, at least finished for the fabrication process. As you can see here, you can see the strip that I added, and in the video we showed you how we butted that up tight, tacked it, and then welded it. So when it's all said and done, it's like one fluid piece here. So the other thing this does is when you widen the fender, you could overlap the metals, but that's not the correct way to do it. Even if you flanged it and got them to where they're the same level, it's still not correct, because out in the sun it's going to heat up and metals are going to contract and they're going to expand, and then eventually you're going to see a line right where all of that is if it's overlapped. The other issue is, even with weld through primers, you're still going to get moisture back there, and it just gives more chance for something to show up down the road. So the correct way to do it is to butt them up tight and planish it out as if it's one continuous piece. And then, as you can tell, this fender will go to the body shop. It'll get epoxy primer, a little skim coat of filler, and then we'll be down the road. So check out all of our parts, all of our segments on doing this to your fender, and check out all the other videos on YouTube. And while you're there, like and subscribe so you can keep up with all of our new content that we're going to be putting out.